The rover descended slowly, kicking up fine red dust as its landing thrusters fired in short, controlled bursts. Through the thick, reinforced glass of the cockpit, Commander Marissa Tate surveyed the landscape of terraformed Mars with a mixture of awe and unease. The surface stretched endlessly in shades of crimson and copper, dotted with patches of alien vegetation, a testament to humanity's decades-long effort to make this once-dead world habitable. Thin, wispy clouds floated in the salmon-hued sky, an unfamiliar reminder of Earth. "Touchdown complete," announced Darius Cole, the pilot, his hands steady on the controls. The rest of the crew exchanged glances of relief and muted excitement. This was the culmination of years of training and planning, yet the silence that followed was heavy, as if the planet itself was withholding its welcome. They disembarked onto the rocky terrain, their boots crunching against the dusty soil. The air was thin but breathable, the terraforming's success evident in the faint hum of wind and the distant rustling of leaves on scrubby plants. Dr. Elena Kwan crouched to collect a soil sample, her gloved fingers brushing against the brittle stalks of what resembled Martian grass. She murmured, "Amazing. It's thriving." "Let's keep our amazement short-lived," Marissa said, her voice clipped. "We've got a base to establish and only a limited window to do it." The team moved with practiced efficiency, unloading equipment from the rover and assembling the modular habitat units. Engineer Lila Cross busied herself with the comms array, setting up their link to the orbiting ship, Endurance. The atmosphere buzzed with activity, but Marissa couldn't shake a nagging feeling of being watched. The open expanse of the Martian plains seemed endless, yet suffocatingly close. It wasn't long before the first anomaly appeared. Ryan Delgado, the team's geologist, was setting up a ground-penetrating radar when he paused, his brow furrowed. "Hey, I'm getting something weird here." Marissa strode over, her curiosity piqued. "Weird how?" Ryan gestured to the screen, which displayed a rhythmic pulsing deep beneath the surface. "It's like, I don't know, a heartbeat? Could be geothermal activity, but it's too regular." Dr. Kwan joined them, peering at the monitor. "It's not natural," she said softly. "It's too precise." Before Marissa could order further investigation, the ground beneath Ryan shifted, sending him stumbling backward. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor rippled outward. The vibrations grew stronger, more insistent, until the soil itself cracked open, revealing a dark, gaping hole. "What the hell is that?" Lila's voice cracked over the comms. Marissa instinctively drew her sidearm, though she knew it would be useless against whatever was emerging. A foul stench wafted up from the hole, a mix of decay and something metallic. The team watched in stunned silence as the ground collapsed further, revealing a cavernous chamber beneath them. Within the depths, something moved, shapes shifting and glinting in the dim light, like shards of obsidian given life. Then they came. The creatures surged upward in a tide of glistening black bodies, each the size of a wolf, their exoskeletons reflecting the weak sunlight like polished armor. Mandibles clicked in a grotesque symphony, their serrated edges dripping with viscous fluid. Compound eyes glowed faintly with a malevolent amber light. "Fall back!" Marissa shouted, firing a shot into the swarm. The bullet ricocheted harmlessly off an armored carapace. To the rover, now! The team scattered, abandoning their equipment as the insects swarmed over it, dismantling and consuming the machinery with terrifying precision. Lila screamed as one of the creatures leaped at her, its mandibles clamping around her leg. Before Marissa could react, the insect dragged Lila toward the edge of the hole, her screams abruptly cut off as she disappeared into the darkness. Marissa grabbed Dr. Kwan and shoved her toward the rover. "Move! Don't stop!" The remaining crew scrambled into the vehicle, slamming the hatch shut just as the swarm reached them. The insects battered the exterior, their mandibles screeching against the metal, but the rover held. Inside, the survivors panted, their faces pale and streaked with sweat. Through the small viewport, Marissa watched in horror as the swarm overtook their habitat, tearing it apart in minutes. What remained was dragged into the hole, piece by piece, until the surface was eerily pristine once more, as if nothing had been there at all. Marissa turned to her team, their faces reflecting her own fear and disbelief. "We need to regroup," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We'll figure this out. We have to." No one responded. Outside, the swarm dissipated, retreating into the depths, leaving only silence and the faint vibration beneath the soil. The Martian night fell quickly, draping the red landscape in cold, suffocating darkness. Inside the cramped confines of the rover, the air was thick with unease. No one had spoken since the swarm retreated, their thoughts orbiting around the same impossible question: how could they survive this? Commander Marissa Tate broke the silence, her voice steady but strained. "Inventory. We need to know what we have left. Food, water, tools, everything. Dr. Kwan, status on the comms?" Dr. Elena Kwan looked up from the portable terminal, her face drawn and pale. "The main array was destroyed, and the rover's backup is only short range. We can't reach endurance. Without that link—" She trailed off, not needing to finish. Marissa nodded grimly. She didn't have time to dwell on the implications. Lila had most of the technical gear. That means we're short on everything. Delgado, assess the remaining shelter modules. We'll need something better than this tin can. Ryan Delgado, pale but trying to mask his fear, gave a shaky nod. "I'll see what I can salvage." The team moved mechanically, their minds tethered to the grim reality of their situation. Every step outside the rover felt like an invitation to death. Delgado stayed close to the vehicle, scanning the wreckage of their habitat with a handheld flashlight. The Martian wind howled faintly, carrying with it a strange, almost imperceptible clicking sound. "I've got some panels and a few tools," he reported through the comms. "Not much else. The shelter's a total loss." Marissa clenched her jaw. They were exposed, vulnerable. If the insects returned, the rover would only delay the inevitable. They needed something stronger, something hidden. As dawn broke, the crew began moving what little they had to a rocky outcrop about a kilometer from their landing site. The terrain was uneven and jagged, but it offered cover. Under Marissa's direction, they used salvaged materials to create a crude barricade at the mouth of a shallow cave. It wasn't perfect, but it felt safer than the open plains. The first night in the cave was restless. The team huddled together, the cold seeping through their suits. Every sound outside, every vibration beneath their feet, sent waves of panic through them. It wasn't until the second night that the symptoms began. Ryan was the first to notice. "Is anyone else itching?" he asked, scratching at his wrist. The others exchanged uneasy glances. Soon Marissa noticed a persistent tingle under her skin, followed by the appearance of faint, dark streaks along her forearm. "Take off your gloves," she ordered. The team hesitated but complied. What they saw was horrifying. Black veins snaking beneath their skin, radiating out from small, barely noticeable puncture wounds. Dr. Kwan examined them with trembling hands. It's some kind of reaction," she stammered. "From the venom, maybe? Or—" Her voice faltered as a more sinister possibility took shape. "Eggs." No one spoke for several long moments, the realization settling over them like a shroud. The creatures hadn't just attacked them. They had marked them, claimed them as hosts. Marissa's voice cut through the silence. "We don't have time to panic. We need solutions. Kwan, you're the biologist. How do we stop this?" Dr. Kwan shook her head, her face pale. "I don't know. I'd need a lab, proper equipment, none of which we have. We don't even know the gestation period." Ryan slammed his fist against the wall. "So we're just waiting to hatch?" His voice cracked, his fear spilling out. "This is insane." "We're not giving up," Marissa snapped. "Not while we're still breathing." The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. They experimented with crude treatments, applying heat to the affected areas, injecting anti-venom from their medical kits. But nothing worked. Ryan's condition worsened quickly. The black veins spread across his body, and he began complaining of unbearable heat and hunger. He grew erratic, muttering about vibrations he could feel deep inside his skull. On the fourth night, Marissa woke to find him gone. She grabbed a flashlight and ventured into the cave's depths, her heart pounding. The air was thick with an organic, metallic scent. She found Ryan in a shallow alcove, his body twisted and rigid, partially encased in a strange, fibrous substance that pulsed faintly with a sickly green light. His chest moved unnaturally, as if something inside was pressing against his ribs. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice trembling. His eyes flicked open, and for a moment she thought she saw recognition. But then his lips parted, and a chittering, alien sound emerged. His body convulsed violently, and the fibrous material tightened around him, pulling him deeper into the wall. Marissa staggered back, bile rising in her throat. She had no choice. Raising her sidearm, she fired into Ryan's chest, silencing the horror. The material around him hissed and recoiled, its glow fading. When she returned to the others, her face was hard, her voice cold. "Ryan's gone," she said. "And if this happens to any of us, we do the same. Understood?" No one argued. The reality was clear. They were infected, and the clock was ticking. Their survival depended not just on finding a way to stop the insects, but on preventing themselves from becoming part of the hive. In the distance, the faint clicking sounds grew louder, echoing through the cave like a grim countdown. The clicking was everywhere. It echoed through the barren Martian terrain, growing louder with each passing hour. Inside the cave, the sound became a constant reminder that the swarm was adapting, learning, and waiting for the right moment to strike. The team, now whittled down to 3, Marissa, Darius, and Dr. Quan, huddled around a dwindling pile of supplies, their faces drawn and pale. "We're not dealing with simple creatures," Dr. Quan said, her voice shaking. "They're calculating. Every move we've made, they've countered. They're testing us." Marissa stared into the dim light of the portable lantern. Her mind was a whirlwind of fear and determination. If they're testing us, then they can fail. We just need to find their weakness before they find ours. "They're already inside us," Darius muttered, rubbing at the black veins crawling up his neck. "What's left to find?" Marissa shot him a sharp look. "We're still alive. That's what's left." Dr. Quan, despite her own growing symptoms, worked tirelessly to understand the insect's biology. Using samples of the fibrous material she had collected from Ryan's remains, she discovered the creature's hive structure wasn't just a physical network, but a biological one. The fibers carried signals, pheromones, and vibrations that allowed the swarm to communicate instantly across vast distances. "It's like a nervous system," she explained, holding up a piece of the pulsating material. "They're not individuals, they're extensions of something larger, something centralized." Marissa leaned forward. "The Queen." Dr. Quan nodded. "If we destroy her, the hive might collapse. The drones rely on her signals to organize. Without them, they could become disoriented, maybe even die." Marissa's mind raced. They'd seen the Queen during their flight from the initial attack, her massive, pulsating body buried deep within the cavern, her bioluminescent eyes flickering like a heartbeat. The Queen was the key, but reaching her seemed impossible. The swarm had fortified the tunnels leading to her chamber, and their previous attempts to repel the insects had only bought them moments of safety. Darius, who had been silent for most of the conversation, spoke up. "We still have the fuel cells from the rover. If we rig them to detonate—" Marissa cut him off. "We'd never get close enough to plant them. They'd tear us apart before we even reached the chamber." Dr. Quan stared at the fibers in her hands, her brow furrowed. "What if we disrupt their communication first? High-frequency sound might scramble their signals. Give us enough time to make it to the Queen." "It's a gamble," Marissa said, "but it's the best one we've got." The next few hours were a blur of frantic preparation. They rigged their remaining equipment, communications gear, sensors, and power cells, into a crude frequency emitter. Darius worked with quiet efficiency, his hands steady despite the tremors racking his body. Dr. Quan calibrated the device, pushing it to emit a sound powerful enough to overload the hive's organic network. As they worked, the insects began to close in. The clicking grew louder, more synchronized, like the ticking of a malevolent clock. The swarm was preparing to strike, and they knew it. When the device was ready, Marissa addressed the team. "Once this thing goes off, we'll have a small window to reach the Queen. No second chances. We stick together, plant the charges, and get out. Understood?" Darius nodded, his face grim. Dr. Quan hesitated, then said, "If this works, it could destabilize the hive completely. But if it doesn't—" Marissa didn't let her finish. "It'll work." They activated the emitter, and the effect was immediate. A piercing, bone-rattling sound erupted from the device, reverberating through the cave. Outside, the swarm reacted violently, their organized movements devolving into chaos. The clicking became erratic, and the insects staggered, their coordination disrupted. "Move!" Marissa shouted. They pushed through the disoriented swarm, flamethrowers and makeshift weapons clearing a path through the writhing mass. The insects, though momentarily confused, still lashed out, their mandibles snapping inches from the team. Darius fought with desperate ferocity, his movements slowing as the infection in his body worsened. Dr. Kwan carried the detonator for the fuel cells, her grip firm despite the sweat pouring down her face. The tunnel leading to the Queen's chamber was a nightmare of writhing larval sacs and pulsating walls. The air was thick with the stench of decay and the metallic tang of the fibrous material. As they entered the chamber, the Queen came into view, a grotesque towering mass of chitin and flesh, her abdomen fused to the cavern wall. Bioluminescent veins pulsed rhythmically, filling the chamber with an eerie green glow. Her eyes, glowing orbs of malevolence, fixed on the intruders. Darius staggered, clutching his chest. "Go," he rasped. "I'll hold them off." Marissa turned, her heart twisting. "No, we—" "Go!" he roared, shoving her forward. Dr. Kwan and Marissa pressed on as Darius turned back to face the approaching swarm. His flamethrower roared, cutting through the insects, buying them precious seconds. They reached the base of the Queen, the grotesque pulsating body filling their vision. Marissa planted the charges, her hands moving on autopilot, while Dr. Kwan readied the detonator. The Queen writhed, her bioluminescent eyes flickering erratically, as if sensing her impending doom. As they finished, the swarm surged into the chamber. Dr. Kwan shoved the detonator into Marissa's hands. "Get out of here! Finish it!" "What are you?" Kwan smiled faintly. "Someone has to make sure they don't follow you." Before Marissa could protest, Kwan turned and ran toward the swarm, a flare in one hand and a knife in the other. The insects hesitated, their focus split between her and Marissa. With no time to waste, Marissa sprinted back through the tunnels. Behind her, the chamber erupted in fire and chaos as the charges detonated. The explosion rocked the cavern, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then the clicking returned, louder and more erratic than ever. The ground trembled beneath Marissa's boots as she stumbled out of the collapsing tunnels and into the open Martian landscape. A choking cloud of red dust and smoke billowed behind her, the faint remnants of Dr. Kwan's screams swallowed by the deafening roar of the explosion. The world spun in Marissa's vision, her body racked with exhaustion and the relentless itching beneath her skin. She collapsed to her knees, coughing violently as the thin, terraformed air seared her lungs. The horizon burned with a faint green glow, the last traces of the Hive's destruction. The Queen was dead. The Hive's harmony had shattered, and the insects swarmed aimlessly across the plains, their once coordinated movements now chaotic and disjointed. Marissa should have felt relief, maybe even triumph. Instead, she felt hollow. Her helmet visor displayed critical warnings. Oxygen reserves were dangerously low, her vitals were unstable, and the infection had spread through most of her body. The black veins beneath her skin throbbed, each pulse sending a wave of heat and nausea through her. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with the emergency beacon on her belt. Endurance. This is Commander Marissa Tate. Mission failed. We're compromised. Her voice cracked and she fought to keep it steady. Ryan, Lila, Quan, all gone. No survivors except me. I killed the Queen. The Hive's destabilized. Mars. It's not safe for colonization. Repeat. Not safe. Don't send anyone else. Static was her only reply. The comms array had been destroyed days ago, and she knew the signal wouldn't reach orbit. Still, the act of speaking into the void gave her a brief illusion of control, a fleeting moment to stave off despair. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the landscape into a frigid twilight. The Martian cold bit into her exposed skin where her suit had torn, but she welcomed the numbness. It dulled the unbearable itching beneath her flesh, the sensation of something wriggling just below the surface. She unfastened her gloves and stared at her hands in the dim light, horrified by what she saw. The black veins were no longer veins. They moved. Tiny bulges rippled along the lines, traveling up her wrists and disappearing beneath her sleeves. Marissa gagged, her stomach convulsing. She clawed at her arms, tearing at her suit in a frantic attempt to expel the alien invaders. Her nails scraped against her skin, drawing blood. But it was useless. The larvae were too deep, too entrenched. "Damn you," she whispered hoarsely, her voice trembling with rage and despair. "Damn you for this." A faint vibration thrummed through the ground, growing stronger with each passing moment. Marissa raised her head and saw them, what remained of the swarm, stumbling and lurching across the rocky terrain. Though their movements were erratic, their intent was clear. They were coming for her, driven not by the Queen's will, but by some primal instinct to reclaim their host. She staggered to her feet, her body screaming in protest. The beacon was still clutched in her trembling hands, the red light blinking weakly. Her mind raced, calculating the odds of surviving long enough for Endurance to notice her absence. The chances were infinitesimal, but she had to try. The insects were closing in, their clicking mandibles a cacophony of terror. Marissa gritted her teeth and turned to face them. "You want me?" she spat, raising the beacon like a weapon. "Come and get me." With her last reserves of strength, she ran. Every step was agony, her infected limbs barely obeying her commands. The terrain was uneven, jagged rocks tearing at her exposed skin, but she pushed forward, fueled by sheer willpower. The swarm followed, their numbers thinning as some collapsed from disorientation. Yet those that remained were relentless, their glowing eyes fixed on her. The faint outline of the rover came into view, half buried in the dust from the explosion. Marissa felt a surge of hope, fragile and fleeting. If she could reach it, she might still have a chance to broadcast a distress signal to Endurance. She stumbled toward it, her vision blurring as the infection sapped the last vestiges of her strength. Her legs gave out just meters from the rover. She crawled the rest of the way, her fingers digging into the dirt as the insects swarmed closer. Reaching the vehicle, she hauled herself inside and slammed the hatch shut behind her. The sound of mandibles scraping against the metal echoed in her ears, but she ignored it. Her focus was on the control panel. The beacon. Activate the beacon. Her hands moved sluggishly over the controls, the infection making even the simplest movements a monumental effort. She finally managed to power up the transmitter, the screen flickering to life. Her reflection stared back at her, barely recognizable, sunken eyes, cracked lips, and those black veins pulsating like living tattoos. A wave of pain doubled her over. Her chest heaved, and she felt something shifting inside her, clawing its way upward. She screamed, a guttural sound torn from the depths of her soul. Blood spilled from her mouth as the first larva emerged, wriggling and glistening in the dim light. She swatted it away, her vision darkening. The transmitter emitted a weak pulse, its signal struggling to breach the planet's thin atmosphere. Marissa slumped against the console, her breathing shallow. She knew the signal wouldn't reach Earth. It might not even reach Endurance, but she'd done everything she could. The insects outside grew silent, their movements slowing. The hive's link was gone, and with it, their purpose. Yet Marissa knew it didn't matter. Her purpose was gone, too. She had fought, sacrificed, and endured more than she thought possible. But in the end, Mars had claimed her. As her vision faded, she gazed out at the endless expanse of red dust and jagged rocks. The faint glow of Earth was a tiny pinprick in the sky, impossibly far away. A bitter smile touched her lips. "Not safe," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Not safe." The light of the beacon pulsed weakly, a silent cry for help that no one would answer. And then there was only silence,